but looking more at the digital information literacy, and kind of brought this topic to the current state of affairs right now. And I mean, this topic is applicable not just to us as educators, but and our students, but I think it's a broad topic that applies to the younger generations, teenagers that are, digitally keyed in and are consuming information all the time, and then also older generations too. So what does it mean to be information literate? Here's just the base definition from the American Library Association, that it's a set of abilities requiring individuals to recognize when information is needed and have the ability to locate, evaluate, and use effectively the needed information. So, Lauren, obviously you know this definition, and spent, countless your, study on it. Rebecca, so inside English 101 and the English department, you have familiarity with teaching information literacy as well, right?
We do, although I have to admit, again, I've been highly dependent on the library to teach me a lot of this stuff. So I can't really, I'd like to say I speak for my department, but I really don't know if I do. But as far as information literacy, actually one of the biggest things that I've been focusing on is fact checking the last couple of years, and where you go and how you go about it. And we spend a lot of time on how you think about using search engines, and even on how to narrow down when you're looking on the library databases. Again, heads up to Lauren, as always, she knows this. But this is what I've really been focusing a lot on, and anything that I can get that's new to make it easier for them, I'm looking for all the time.
Yeah, definitely. And I teach English composition too, and I do a lot of this as well when we're assigning research papers, or any time that students have to use sources inside of their writing. I mostly refer students to the academic literacy, so using the library databases. I don't know, there was one course that I taught that they had to do some like pop culture, that I had them looking up like non-academic articles. So I don't think that's interesting. Like, I don't think I get into as much of the Google searching as I do the library databases.
Yeah, I'm a huge fan of the crap test. That is like one of my favorite things I ever use. So again, I can't say enough. I'm not kissing Lauren's butt here, but I can't say enough about the library, because I wouldn't even have known about all this stuff when I started teaching if it wasn't for that. So we spent an entire class period using the crap test to analyze websites.
Yes, yeah, I love that. And the students, it really resonates with the students because they kind of giggle and laugh.
Oh, thank you.
And I was going to suggest to faculty too of always reaching out to the library and having them come into their classes. Because Lauren, even in our remote teaching, you're still able to go into classes and conduct library sessions.
Yeah, so I feel like I'm preaching to the choir here because Rebecca's already set hers up. But yeah, we are doing, but just good information to share. Like, we are doing live sessions through Blackboard Collaborate. But then another way that we are, kind of accommodating faculty and students both are, we're doing recorded like screencast tutorials as well. So if faculty are more comfortable with more of an asynchronous session, we can record a tutorial, or we can come into your Blackboard shell and do a live Collaborate session.
Oh, Lauren, awesome. I'm sorry, Christina, can I just ask Lauren real quick?
Oh, yeah, of course.
Can we do both? Like, would you be able to send me a link for maybe a student that's not there that day, or if they need a refresher, and have that embedded?
Rebecca, anything. Yeah, totally.
Right.
And it wouldn't be as long, just because I found that, live, and we can ask questions, it's a little bit more engaging. So with a recorded tutorial, I try to cap it at like 15 minutes max, just because it's me talking to a screen. But yeah, we can do both. So I can record it for both of your classes, and then I can have it's a YouTube link. So you could just embed it in your course shell for anyone, even if they did attend, if they just need a refresher. And then for students who didn't attend, you can send out the link as well. So yeah, we can totally do that.
All right, thanks. Yeah, that'll be awesome. Sorry,
Definitely.
Christina.
Oh, no problem. And then I also tell faculty that the library sessions are tailored to their classes, right? So you would work with the faculty on like, what assignment did you assign? You know, what kind of research are they doing to tailor that?
Exactly. Yeah. So that is how we prefer to engage. We, speak with the faculty before the class session and talk with them about what they would like us to cover, what assignment, because we all know that the more relevant it is to the student's assignment and what they're working on, the better, which is why one of the reasons I feel like Rebecca and I have both had such a strong relationship over the years is it's very, very tailored to the specific assignments that the students are working on. So again, like you were just talking before, we can focus more on the library databases. There are some faculty who focus more on, more popular publications, newspapers, magazines, for whatever reason, right? Websites. Right. And so we can absolutely tailor our instruction to those kinds of assignments as well.
Yeah, definitely. So here is a visual representation of a definition of information literacy. So it encompasses, what information am I looking for? Where am I going to find that? How am I going to find it? Is that information even good? And then finally, how do I use that information ethically? The broader scope of information literacy covers various literacies. So obviously we've got academic literacy, which is our context of engaging in an academic conversation or a scholarly conversation, but it also covers digital literacy. And what that means is engaging in information literacy, that connects with the digital world. So how do we engage in the digital world safely and ethically? And recognizing, oops, sorry. Oh, I didn't click. So here, so this shows the information literacy landscape and the interconnectedness of these various literacies. And we have to recognize that digital information literacy is a 21st century skill. So the ability to find, evaluate, and use digital information is something that we have to kind of focus on and recognize and share this vision across the institution. Because we're no longer ordering, the newest encyclopedia edition or scrolling through microfiche. How we access information has changed. And we kind of have to move our conversation in that direction. And we're consuming information digitally at a much younger age as well. You see younger generations, growing up using devices, smartphones, iPads, and if we don't have these conversations with them, they're not going to be able to recognize misinformation when they come across it. We often call the younger generation, that I don't know if you've heard the term digital native, that they're kind of born into this digital age, but that doesn't necessarily mean, I think that they could still be digitally naive and they still need to build the critical thinking skills to process the digital content that they're encountering. And one of those sources is social media. So here on social media is where they're encountering some of this misinformation or false news headlines. Interestingly or ironically, as I was searching for an image, I came across this image of showing the amount of Americans who get their news from social media. And I found that on Pinterest. But when I clicked on it, because it looked interesting, it pulled up the Pew Research Center. So it's not to say that social media doesn't have really credible information. It's just, because it's connected, it's a connected network. It's much easier to spread misinformation. But I thought it was interesting, the fact from the Pew Research Center that found 6 in 10 Americans get their news from social media. So about 62% in some way, maybe it's often, sometimes maybe it's just a little bit, in some way receive news via social media. And this is where you're going to find, what's termed as fake news, which is narrowly defined as a made up, just outright invented, meant to deceive a news article. It's often geared towards getting clicks, to fuel ads, to make money. Some things that I found out is that includes photography. And I remember when I first realized, and this was pretty recently, that people were posting doctored photos in order to sensationalize some sort of news event. And I thought, who would do that? It just seems so unethical to me to post false videos and pictures, but it's out there, and if you didn't know it was out there, it's easy to be deceived, and it's dangerous as well. There's also a lot of fake news sites, and I found it interesting. One of them here was World News Daily Report, and the tagline says, "Where facts don't matter." But yeah, so it says right there, its purpose is probably entertainment, maybe it's satire, maybe it's just loaded with ads and clickbait. But if you're not aware that this sort of fake news site exists, you're going to click on it and you're going to look, and you're, going to digest that information in some way or another. Another one I found was Now 8 News, and in the About page, which is a good way to find out more about a source, is going to their About page. They say that they accept viewer submissions. So here you have, just like you would with blogs or Wikipedia, information that anyone can post, and it's unverified. And that's what we're looking for, is the credibility of the author. Kind of slow down. Also, looking at the clickbait headlines. So these are headlines geared towards making you want to click on them. So here we've got WikiLeaks confirms Hillary sold weapons to ISIS, then drops another bombshell. So right away you can tell there's words in all caps. That's usually a tip-off that it's not credible. The use of an exclamation point or the ellipses kind of leads you like, oh, I should click on this to find out more. Or misleading headlines, like this one from CNN. Has Donald Trump hit rock bottom? Now, this is misleading because the headline does not match what the article is about. When you read this title, what do you think of? Hit rock bottom is sort of has its own connotations.
Yeah, like there's no way he could ever win or do anything good.
Like it's over.
Yeah.
Or even, we usually say hit rock bottom is like some sort of mental breakdown, or just like it's all, yeah, he's just lost it, it's all over for him. It's very sensationalized headline, meant for you to click in and find out more, when really the article was suggesting that his polling numbers are as low as they're going to get, and they're not going to get any lower. So I think that there's two different tones there, an over-exaggerated tone of like, this is rock bottom, instead of just simply stating, we think that the polling numbers won't go any lower. So yeah, definitely analyzing for tone is one way to find misleading information. Here's another misleading headline. Air pollution now leading cause of lung cancer. So right away you think, well, the number one reason that people get lung cancer is air pollution, whereas the body of the article is stating that air pollution is the leading environmental cause, whereas smoking is still the main culprit. But you can see how you might think something else from the title. So news travels fast, but false news travels even faster. Aside from the bots and the algorithms that kind of pull more fake false news up in your news feed, which creates this like echo chamber effect, where if you click on one false news site, it's going to pull up more like that, and then you're just surrounded by unverified information, and it's hard to get out of that if you're not consciously making the effort to research further. And the trouble with this, really, the traveling of false news is people and human behavior. It's people sharing these posts as well. Researchers at MIT analyzed retweets from 2006 to 2017 and came up with some really interesting conclusions. So they found that falsehood or false information was diffused significantly farther, faster, deeper, and more broadly than the truth in all categories of information. So false political news specifically, if it was political, reached more than 20,000 people nearly 3 times faster than all other types of false news, which reached 10,000 people. And then it took the truth, so they categorized articles that were true, it took those 6 times as long as falsehood to reach 1,500 people. So false news traveled faster than truth, which are some scary sort of conclusions. So why is that? What are some reasons that false news would travel faster? Well, sensationalized or emotional content makes you want to share it, makes you want to click on it more than something that might be true. It's easier to believe if it's more reassuring. You want to click on it, even if it's not true, it reassures you. And we like things that sound exciting and new. So if it's something new, we want to click on it and share it, even if it's false. Our behaviors tend towards spreading information that elicit a strong emotional response. We're much faster to click on it and to share it than if it had more of a neutral, unbiased tone. So looking at our behaviors as a solution to spreading false information is really one of the ways to go, even though Facebook and other social media sites do employ fact checkers. Facebook has an algorithm that detects and weeds out false information, but that's not a magic bullet, and it's not something that we should see as the solution. We really need to recognize our behavior and our participation in this false news, phenomenon. So what are the dangers here? Well, we can see that with this current pandemic, the spreading of misinformation about COVID-19 and how the conspiracies or the false treatments, what works to prevent, the COVID-19, false information can be dangerous to your health. The World Health Organization kind of came out and declared this as an infodemic. So we're not just in a pandemic, we're in an infodemic where there's just so much information out there on a topic. We all want to read about it. We're all concerned, and we want so much information, but we are not, or it's hard to find what is the truth about it. And what does that do? That fuels panic and confusion, and something that we have to really look at and improve. A reason why we need to improve our digital literacy skills. I like this image. We're drowning in information, but we're starved for knowledge. I also read an article that this was I think maybe a couple of years ago, that talked about older generations like the baby boomers or the golden generation, how they're having trouble making informed decisions because they're not aware that the ways in which misinformation can be spread. So they're digitally naive in thinking that something that you see online might not be true. And that could be a way to kind of sway the votes for that generation. That was a few years ago. So with all of this sort of these avenues for misinformation, where do you go? What is a credible source that you use to find information that you rely on? If we can kind of share that, I'd love to hear.
Lauren has the advantage here, so I'm going to defer to her first.
Yes, please tell us. Where do you go to for credible information?
Well, Library resources.
Oh, how predictable, Miss Cosgrove.
No, I would say I really rely personally on the New York Times for a lot of my personal information, which, by the way, you can access through the library. Have a free subscription.
Oh, God.
Yes, I
I'm
saw
on
that.
big infomercial mode right now.
Oh my God. I do, Lauren, I do the New York Times. I also do, sometimes you have to check it though, but I'm kind of a big fan of CNN. But I find that even with that, sometimes you have to check some of it because you have to be careful, especially if you go to their, what I think is a miserable website. If you go there to just try to figure something out, it's terribly laid out. But like some of the blog and editorial stuff is mixed in with the facts. So even though I like it, trying to teach it, I think would be a nightmare.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree.
Yeah. And there sort of seems like these two camps, like the free news or the free publications, and then those that are paid. So where can we get, and Lauren, you can help us, where can we get access to, like you said, like the New York Times, we can get access for free, but what are some other paid publications that have more credible information that we would need to pay for that, if we don't have those funds, we wouldn't have access to? Like the Wall Street Journal.
Yeah, Wall Street Journal, Chicago Tribune. There's a lot, right? I'm trying to even think of some of our more popular ones that students use in the library. I mean, you can go all the way from some of those newspaper publications all the way through to, academic journals. So yeah, there's a lot, and I make the joke often with students in classroom, like, we tend to think that everything's freely available on Google, and if it's not there, it doesn't exist. But that's definitely not the case, that there's so much that is not available freely through Google.
Yeah. But
Lauren,
you can get it
through the library. Oh, I'm sorry. No, I was asking Lauren how she feels about Time magazine as a source.
Yeah, I mean, I would probably, if I was going to do a scale, I'd probably place it somewhere in between CNN and the New York Times.
Okay.
I would, use it, but I think it's a great source, but also they do a lot of like bios and things like that. And so I think like how you paint people, or like how you do like more of an in-depth, it can be less objective than maybe something like the New York Times, and maybe a little bit more subjective. So oh, what a great slide. Look at you, Tina.
Yeah, but we had this as an activity of like rating some of these from most trustworthy to least trustworthy, kind of like the same conversation that we're having.
Yeah.
Where would they fall? Like Huffington Post. A lot of students go to Huffington Post.
Right. Yeah, that's a super popular one.
Yeah, and if you look at it, it looks very similar to like USA Today in terms of like how it's laid out. So I don't think there's any like distinguishing factors of why it would be less credible without kind of digging deeper. BuzzFeed, that's a kind of different, that's kind of a little bit more popular look to it. What about, how would you rate BBC versus CBS as a news outlet?
I'd probably put BBC over CBS.
Me too.
Yeah.
So then there was like surprises you sometimes, right? It's like the same thing. I kind of joke around with students too about like, sometimes we roll our eyes at like, the publications that are in the checkout line at the grocery store, but at the same time, like they've broken huge stories that end up being true. So it's like, it's also kind of, interesting to bring up some of those examples.
Yes, yeah. I found this a part of Trusting News Project. So it was from Reynolds Journalism Institute, a part of University of Missouri, that did a study on perceptions of the trustworthy of news sources. There was a little bit of a bias to this because the participants were already news consumers, and 62% of them paid for their news. But I thought it was interesting, like what the perceptions of trustworthiness were. So like on this, BBC is very highly trusted versus CBS is sort of in the middle. Huffington Post and BuzzFeed are not trustworthy. So, I thought it was interesting to see this and see what your opinions were. The Economist was the highest rated. But like you're saying, in all of these cases, doesn't mean that there can't be misinformation. And even if it is a well-known source, obviously they want to be right. They want to be accurate in their reporting. They have an invested interest too, because they're more widely spread. They're going to get the biggest backlash if they are posting not the most credible information, but they don't always get it right. And I think in any sort of situation, you should be pulling at least 2 or more sources to verify that information.
There's also the elements of the mindfulness. Like if I could just bring up, I personally love the Atlantic, but when I bring it up in class, I bring up the biasness of it. Because to me, it's obvious. I mean, I love it because honestly, it gets a little crazy liberal sometimes, like I can. But in order to teach it, I have to actually teach the article, the information versus the bias. And I have to like make the students see, and remind them they're writing for the audience that agrees with them, that could pay for this. And I do this in my 101 class. And I'm not sure if there's an easier way to do it, but it does seem like only half of them are kind of comprehending that. I'm always wishing I could make an easier transition with that,
So just the concept of bias.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, definitely. And I like how you, I don't know if someone else was saying something. I like how you said, like, it's okay, like you enjoy reading on, it's okay to read these publications that are biased as long as you know that there's a bias, and that's a part of your consumption, is knowing that. And then also diversifying and also looking at publications that are more neutral. And it might you might see the same content in both. Yeah, good point. Let me go back to so yeah, my point is that we have to rely on research. There we go. Hold on. So be skeptical, remain critical, and ask questions. Questions about the author, the purpose, the audience, and the techniques that the author uses to communicate their message. So the different types of research, and I'm leaning more towards analyzing the non-academic, but at the same time, I didn't want to ignore the academic research and the usefulness in using scholarly peer-reviewed articles and the lovely, lovely resources of the library article databases. And I was even going to go into the differences with the Google Scholar, because there's always some tips and tricks to using Google Scholar. But I think we kind of all know those. So what's some recent research you've had to do? Some examples of, professional maybe and personal? And where did you go to find that information? And how did you know it was credible? I guess that's a lot.
Wow, I feel like I'm getting a test. Well, I would say personal, actually, I recently had a medical issue where I was diagnosed with high cortisol and they thought I might have a brain tumor, which it worked out okay. But it was, I didn't even know. I'm like, how do you get high cortisol? How do you get all this stuff? And like you Google it in first. I mean, I'm smart enough to know I'll go to Wikipedia, use it as a search engine, first of all, just to explain to me what the bases. And that's, I try to teach my students use it as a search engine, but then I end up going to things like the Mayo Clinic, the NCBI, you know, the real, again, because I know it, you know, this is so hard when you translate this into teaching, because like I know where to go and my students don't. And then professional, I've been, I just started introducing in the spring. I'm always, and Lauren can attest to this, I'm never happy with my one-on-one classes. I think I drive her more crazy than myself. But with 101, I've been experimenting on how to teach them generational views through media. And I'm doing it through restaurants, of all things, and technology. So, because they have a paper that deals with that. So to find information on that, it was, and I'm not even sure in a lot of places I got completely accurate information. I mean, I found myself on like restaurant reviews by, I can't think of his name, Anthony, I don't even remember, the crazy guy that wrote the books, the crazy shirt. Yeah. So I used him for some information on, you know, who goes to what restaurants. And then I'm a TED Talk junkie. But as I learned from there was a TED Talk woman that did something, presented it, and she was found out to be false. Now I have to actually research the person that gives the TED Talk if I'm going to teach it. So, and it's been very difficult actually to find we know, and I can tell Christina, you're already alluding to this, that there is a difference in consuming information through different media based on your age group. And to try to find really good information to back that up, for me personally, has been very difficult.
Yeah, it is very difficult. And that's a great example about the health. Like we naturally go to Google to try and find out what's wrong with us and self-diagnose. I don't know if that's a time management thing. Like I don't really have time to go to the doctor right now. So, but yeah, we rely on WebMD and those sorts of things.
That always tells you have cancer, though. You have to stay away from WebMD. You always have cancer with them.
I know. Doctors always get like frustrated of like, but I read online it says this. But yeah, that's a really awesome, like that's a really interesting kind of research question that you're posing for your class. And I think it kind of like makes the point of like, will we ever find the truth, or will we ever fully research something? Does it end? Is there an end point? And I don't think the answer is no, I don't think there is. Lauren, do you have anything to add to that about just, how complicated research can get?
I mean, this is why it consumes my full-time job, right? Like,
why we should go to you and get help.
But it is. I mean, there's so many, like, that's where even like with Rebecca, right? Like we have, 50 or 75 minutes together, depending on your class. And I always feel like there's more to cover and there's more to talk about, right? It's such a huge topic and it touches so many areas. So, I mean, just to affirm that like, yes, this is like a skill that we develop over time. Like Rebecca, your presence here, like, even though you teach it over and over and over again, it's still like, there's still more to touch on and there's still more to engage with. So just affirming that, yes, it's a really large topic and there's so much to cover always.
Yeah. And hopefully we can instill in our students too, of critical inquiry and continuously searching for truth, outside of this class or outside of school.
Totally. Right. Yeah. And that's why it's one of our general education outcomes, right? Like it's not just you take this one class or you do this one assignment, like done, right? You are information literate, but that it's this continual process in your program, but also that you continue to develop over time.
Yeah. And it's so tied into, like you're saying, the general education outcomes for critical thinking too. I mean, you can't do most of this without those critical thinking skills.
Yeah, totally.
Okay.
And when it comes to the critical thinking, I'm trying something new, Lauren, especially you might like this. I already started day one this week where I started emphasizing on how one of the main points in my class is to critically think better before you even write. So we'll see if I can drill it in their heads a little more,
I love that. Did you share with them it's one of the general education outcomes?
No, I'm not trying to lose them this quick, Lauren.
But I mean, that's fantastic.
No, I will.
Awesome strategy. I'm into it.
I figured you would be.
So we talked about credibility, you know, in looking for credible sources of information, and Rebecca mentioned bias as well. I also included accuracy. Obviously, we all use the CRAP method, so accuracy is one of them. And distorting facts, distorting the truth. This image kind of shows where you're taking a snapshot of something, blowing it up, and it looks like something different. And then in this next slide, I wanted to talk about just the ways in which to research to find more information on a topic. So, you know, I'm saying, you know, always find more sources. Here I put 2 or more sources, but I think you might need more than 2. So how can you search? What are certain search techniques to pull information that relates to the topic and diving deeper into that topic? Because just because you search one thing and you pull up maybe 3 results on that, that is not the limit of information on that. It's about how you vary your search terms to pull either a broader list of sources or a more narrowed list of searches. You know, that could be an example would be like researching, why does my foot hurt? And then you're coming up with the first source says, sorry, your foot's gonna fall off. But really, you know, do you take that? Oh no, my foot's gonna fall. No, you have to search a little bit deeper, and narrowing your search terms include maybe channeling that. Maybe it's a throbbing pain in my big toe, and then you find out, oh, it's fine. I'm gonna be fine. So you know, that's just a silly example of, you know, how to kind of ask your questions and vary your search terms. I also, in my classes, you know, teach the students about crafting search terms, and I tell them to avoid asking questions, because, you know, students will often do that. You know, they ask the full question, and you know, sometimes I do this too. I'll put in the full question, and you know, you're getting dated or you're getting older when you reference Ask Jeeves. And they like don't know what you mean. Like at some point we used Ask Jeeves. I don't know if you remember. And like that's where you typed in the question verbatim, and it would pull up results. Don't do that anymore. It's best to, you know, use search terms. And I also tell students, and I wanted to tell this to faculty as well, is that different libraries have different holdings. So like for Triton, for example, like the holdings that we have might differ from the holdings that UIC will have. So just because you don't see it there doesn't mean that that information doesn't exist, and it warrants a visit to the librarian to double check. I'm looking for this information. I'm pretty sure it exists, but I can't find it, and that's where you can reach out for help. Would you say it's a good advice to give to faculty?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
That's why I call Lauren my personal librarian, which, by the way, I already did. They already know you're coming, Lauren. I did that on day 1.
I love that.
I'm a little biased, Christina. Sorry.
Yeah, no, I think that's great. Yeah, obviously I geared this towards more of a general audience. And also like the general, even outside of students, like I was thinking about our kids, like how do we talk to our kids about information literacy? How do we talk to our parents about it? You know, like my mom will say crazy things that she read on the internet, and I have to have that conversation of, you know, hey, this is really how you need to be looking at this, you know? So, yeah. I found this image that says, you know, to pause before you post and ask yourself some critical questions about what it is you're posting on social media to make sure that you're not a part of that system of spreading misinformation. So here's some questions are, is it positive? Is it accurate? Is it useful? Is it supportive? And is it ethical? So again, you know, you're not only analyzing for your own consumption, but if you're one of those people that are sharing posts, you know, sharing pins or tweets or retweeting, you know, you have to take on that responsibility for others as well. And here I've included some other questions that you can ask to determine if the source is false or true. If the story is kind of outrageous or sensationalized, you know, taking a second look at it. If the headline doesn't match the article, that indicates some sort of credibility issue. A lot of the articles I think that we find on social media lift from other, so it's like a summary of like a New York Times article. It'll literally summarize it. That could be accurate, but that could not be. So that's an example of having to go closer to the original source. So pulling up that New York Times article or finding other sources to verify the information that you're seeing. Anytime that you're seeing quotes out of context, if the article isn't providing a context for the quote, that could be misleading of using other people's words to fit the message that you want to send and not its intended message. Being wary of any sort of story that's set in the future of predicting what will happen or may happen. Again, not that you can't read these, but recognizing that these are opinion-based versus fact-based. And then stories that attack a generic enemy. So anytime there's the story or the article is talking generically or broadly without giving specific names or specific details, that's an indication of, hey, I need to stop and think, is this information false or not? And then also looking at the source, looking for editors. You know, one of the reasons I try and the way in which I try to sell using the library databases is that you don't really have to ask a lot of these questions when you go to scholarly peer-reviewed journals, which is what, you know, I'll require in a research paper, is making sure at least giving them the opportunity to discover what a scholarly peer-reviewed journal is, how to read it, where to find it, things like that. I try and sell it like, well, some of the work's already done for you because they already have a body of, you know, editors and reviewers that have already looked at it. So half of this work that I'm asking you to do, you don't have to do. So hopefully that gets them to using those sorts of sources versus Wikipedia or blogs and such. Always trying to look at ways to get students to use the databases. Fact-checking sites. So what do you guys think about fact-checking sites? I personally haven't used a lot of them or suggested anything like this to students, but it looks like there's some good ones out there, like from the Washington Post, Snopes. I've heard of Snopes. Sunlight Foundation seemed like it was credible. Do you use any sort of fact-checking sites?
Honestly, Christina, I didn't even know these existed. I did not even know about it.
Yeah, here, let me pull up. I kind of looked at it as like, well, I don't need that. I'm going to do my own work. But then I was researching this topic, and I thought that they might come in use. And I was curious. Let me share my screen. Sharing screen is so difficult on Blackboard. Okay. So can you see? So here I found Sunlight Foundation. It says making government and politics more accountable and transparent.
Huh.
Yeah. And then factcheck.org. And I found these in a credible source. So it's not like I just Googled this.
Right.
Yeah, so this is a project of the Annenberg Public Policy Center. But again, I mean, it's the same kind of question of even these fact checkers, whoever's on the other end fact checking, how are they searching or researching? How are they getting their information? And can you ever really get to the truth? And even when you do, what do you do with that information? Like, for example, I'll often tell students, rely on primary sources of research. So like going to government websites, nonprofit organizations. So like if you're looking for information on COVID, look at the CDC's website. But even there, is there a bias? And what do you do with this information? How do you analyze it and come to understand what it means? Yeah.
Can I just ask a question about it? Do you type in a search for it, or are you just looking up articles? Like I said, I've never used it before.
Okay, I checked out. Okay, sorry.
No problem.
Let me go back. I kind of stopped sharing my screen.
So Rebecca, just a quick answer. I think it depends on which one, but for like the Washington Post one, it's like, I think they organize it by like the most recent in the news. So that's how the one that I've used. It's been like, oh, what's been in the news this week, and kind of like fact check different things. I don't know about some of the other ones though.
Okay, yeah, because I was just wondering, like, let's say I were to try to teach this or something, and I was giving them sort of a direction, like, all right, if they wanted to look up, let's say COVID, like you were just talking about, if you would type in COVID, or do you have to like just search through the articles to see what the most recent COVID article was?
Got it. Yeah. So yeah, like Lauren said, it looks like these are sections or articles that are fact checking popular things that are in the news, but there is a search bar. I know Snopes, and this might not be as credible, has a search bar.
This is really cool. My daughter would love this. She's a research geek like me.
So I've used this before, and maybe even in the Washington Post one, you can use the search bar, to find out what they've posted or kind of debunked about, like, I don't know, the COVID vaccine. I saw something today about it, and that's one thing. I think COVID in general is one thing where I'm always searching for, what's most accurate information. So.
All right, I will definitely check these out.
Yeah,
this is really good to know.
And it's something that I don't normally teach. I think this is just kind of coming up for me because of the times, and because I think, right now the flow of information is just so strong, and it's increasing the spreading of false information. We're looking for quick ways to get at the truth.
Right.
Because it's time consuming. I mean, to see something in the news and then to have to fact check that on your own, I can understand why people wouldn't. It does take time. And sometimes you could spend almost like an hour just like trying to go through and search out, well, who's this person? Oh, this person said this. Well, who's that? So yeah, could be a faster way of fact checking.
I like it.
Wow. Now, you probably teach plagiarism.
Oh, God. Right from day one.
And let me go back to my. And really, I mean, my main point about plagiarism was, let me go back to it gave some examples of popular cases of plagiarism. Oh, here we go. So looking at the Michelle Obama, the Melania Trump speech, in which she was, here, you can see my screen, in which she was accused of plagiarism. And this is a good example of, maybe patch writing. There's two, within the two camps of plagiarism being intentional and unintentional, teaching, when you're teaching paraphrasing and how to paraphrase, looking at patch writing is important. And some of the techniques I use for this of like detecting plagiarism, in addition to like plagiarism detection software, I think we have Safe Assign. Is that commonly used?
Well, from what I know with instructors, yeah.
So yeah, and it's built into Blackboard. but there's also Grammarly. So like I'll tell students about that just because when they get outside of academics, when they're done and they want to kind of check their work, Grammarly offers plagiarism detection as well. But also I just get old school and I tell them to highlight every word that's the same in the original quote and then your paraphrasing section, and to see how much highlighting you have. So that sounds really old school now that I think about it. But it puts the responsibility back on them to really learn how to paraphrase correctly.
I don't think it's old school at all. I think it's really great because they're so visual, Christina. I wouldn't even worry about calling it that. I think that's brilliant. I like it.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. But plagiarism happens because I took an electronic literature class, and one of the main points of that class was just like how we collaborate with other authors. We don't see this as much anymore, but a lot of artists would use popular culture references. They would reference other artists, and it was never considered plagiarism. Whereas now you're seeing, if a story or a song looks similar to someone else's, they're getting called out on plagiarism. And so we want to be collaborating or incorporating other sources of writing, other sources of information into our work. It's a part of growing and critical thinking. But how do you do that ethically? So some other examples, common examples of, or famous examples of plagiarism was Jane Goodall. In her book, Seeds of Hope, she was cited as plagiarizing from things like Wikipedia, and that kind of came up with, it was a citation error. So making sure that you're citing correctly using either APA or MLA. How many instructors use APA versus MLA? Is there one citation style that's preferred over another across the campus, or is it kind of mixed because we have different types of programs?
I would say it's pretty discipline specific for Rebecca. I think in all of the rhetoric and courses and English courses, it's MLA, but I know pretty heavily in social behavioral sciences, education, typically APA, history tends to do Chicago style. So I think it's pretty behavioral specific.
Yeah. Okay. I wondered that. Yeah. And then I also found that Martin Luther King Jr., after his death, was accused of plagiarism as well in his dissertation. But there's also plagiarism in journalism. So Fareed Zakaria was cited multiple times for plagiarism. And you could say that that is unintentional, but at the same time, we hold journalists to a higher standard, I think, and they should know better. So in some way, is that intentional? Another example, and these are good examples to use with students because they usually think, outside of academics, I don't really ever have to worry about plagiarism. Or I've had students say, I'm held to the academic honesty policy now, but I won't have that when I leave here, so it's not going to matter. But even professionally, you're held to these standards, I think. Just for example, a president of a Vermont hospital was resigned because of accusations of plagiarism. Or, an example, Racing and Company's board of directors denied a CEO a raise over plagiarism. So even in business and your workplace, there's real implications and consequences for plagiarizing. So I kind of use that to tell them that this matters outside of this research paper. Do you have any standards for information literacy in your classroom besides we've got the academic honesty policy that's in every syllabus? Obviously you are teaching English, so there is, but I was curious to find out across other disciplines or courses kind of what expectations they kind of put on to students. I'm always up for learning about different disciplines because I'm so specific to my my content area. And I can only imagine, it would be similar in, a science class, but, or the medical field, but I'm
Well,
not.
I'm thinking the one thing is I do, of course, you're like me with the whole MLA and the all
Mhm.
that, but I know that even when my students, I do a lot of multidisciplinary stuff. And like, for example, if a student wants to use scientific research, I have a 5-year policy on information. They can't go over 5 years. It can't be older than that. If they do science, it has to be within 2. So, I mean, there are still some things where I'll put even stronger requirements on it. If they're going to do something like technology, like they actually have an entire essay on that, they have to be within, I like tell them, try to be within the last year. So it
Yeah.
does change based on the discipline I'm having them write about within my class. That I can say.
Oh yeah, that's awesome to break it down into super specific like that.
You know, maybe Lauren knows about other disciplines. You and I are sort of blindered with that.
Yeah.
Blinded, I mean, not blinder.
Well,
Yeah, I would say that like it's health has and like the health careers have pretty tight standards in terms of publication date. Those are probably the most consistent and current that we see. It's often within the last year or two. So that's in terms of publication date. But I think it just depends. That's why we work so closely with instructors, as different instructors have different standards and have different ways of operating. We still have faculty who don't want students to even use citation generators all the way through to faculty are totally comfortable with that.
Mhm.
So it just kind of depends on the topic in terms of standards for resources, standard for citation style. I think that's one of the reasons why we work so closely with individual faculty is because the standards do, I guess, change based off of instructor, but also based off of discipline.
And how are the academic honesty policy, how is that kind of handled when there's a plagiarism case in terms of how it gets reported, and is there anything specific that happens, or mostly just generally instructors handle it on their own?
I would say instructors can handle it on their own, but if it's
Mhm.
particularly egregious, it can go through the dean's office.
Mhm.
So it can, I believe, it's been a little bit the exact language, but I believe it can lead up to it can be a 0 for the assignment, 0 for the class, or it can be no longer at the institution, depending on the level. So
Yeah.
I think most cases that I know of are handled at the instructor level, typically a 0 on the assignment, but it can be reported through the dean's office.
Yeah.
My
Right. Yeah.
understanding too is, and I always, I guess, threaten or scare my students, how you want to do it, that if you are dropped from a class, I tell them that every teacher has the right to fail you in an assignment, or if it's bad enough, get you out of the class. If that is the case, it can go on your transcript. And then to me, because I always equate stealing citations and words from other people just like stealing something in the real world. It keeps following you. It's like having an academic criminal record. And
Oh,
I
yeah.
know that's one way I kind of, again, it was something I even said to my one-on-ones today on day one. And I'm like, and this is why I take it so seriously, to get them to sort of pay attention a little more. But I do know that it can follow you.
Interesting. Yeah. I've never had a case that kind of rose to that level. Like I'll always handle it, on an instructor level. So that's interesting to hear others' experiences.
Yeah, I usually handle mine too, most of them. I find that once a student plagiarizes an assignment, I've only had that I caught, because we miss some, but
Mhm.
I've only caught, I think, 5, and out of those 5, every single one of them landed up leaving or dropping the course. And they admitted to doing it, and they're like, "Oh, I just didn't have the time or whatever, sorry." And no matter what I did, I'm like, "Well, you still got other essays." It was just like they didn't want to come back then, which was sad because, I tried to get them back in. But they admitted it. They had no problems telling me, "Yeah, Miss F, I just did this."
Yeah, and it was a time management issue of just not
Yeah.
having enough time for the assignment or the course maybe
Yeah.
versus the ability to do it. Yeah, that's what I found too.
Yeah.
Although it's interesting. It's like a part of teaching too is getting these cases and then teaching them how to avoid plagiarism. So we see that all the time. But in terms of, I'm curious to hear, if there were other instructors of how they handled those cases, just outside of a different discipline. So, but thank you guys for your perspectives and your comments and adding to this. I've learned a lot. I've only been so I've been here. I've been at Triton about a year, but 6 months of that was off campus. So I still feel very fresh and new and learning more about the courses and the instructors at Triton. So I'm glad that you came and had this opportunity.